So today we're going to be breaking down a spacey and kind of ambient melody for someone like Drake inside of FL Studio. For the first sounds in the melody, I went ahead and created a super lush and full sounding chord stack. So I started off with this double grand felt piano Octavia from Keyscape, then this AMBIENT pad from Vital, and then finally the double felt grand dry piano. So here's what those sound like once they're all combined together. So then hopping into the MIDI for that first sound, really it's a pretty simple pattern and it just uses two chords. I actually ended up playing this out on my MIDI at first, but really it's very easy to just clip these chords in as well. So if I were to go ahead and start making something similar, I would start out by laying out the root notes. So I'm just going to go with B, and then I'm just going to build a chord off of them. So already that's kind of getting that deep and kind of spacey feeling that we're going for, and it's almost kind of emotional. So building off that, we can just start building the chord further and further up to get it sounding more full. So as you can see, it's pretty simple to get these full sounding emotional chords, and that's the exact chord that I used in this MIDI. So hopping back into the normal MIDI, you can see that everything is pitched up a little bit, but if I go ahead and pitch everything down back to B, we can see that we have that exact same chord right there that gives us that really full and emotional sound. Another thing to mention in this MIDI is that I kept it as human as possible. So since I did play this out on my MIDI keyboard, I tried to keep the exact same strum and didn't quantize at all. Moving on to the pad from Vital, the MIDI is the exact same. I just removed the third and the fourth chords. Really, this just allows them to kind of switch back and forth, which is something I like to do in a lot of my melodies. And overall, this sound was super complex, so I didn't want it playing the entire time. Finally, moving on to the last piano, this is the simplest MIDI out of all of them, and I just kept it playing the root notes, so it just kind of fills up the low end. Since the other sounds were kind of high sounding, it does just give it that low end and make it feel even more full. So then moving on to the effects for those, for the main key, I started off by putting Portal on the pitch jumper preset, then Fruity Chorus on the default preset with the mix turned down to about 50%. Then I added another instance of Portal, but this time on the crystalline accent preset, and then finally an EQ just to cut the lows. Next up, for the pad from Vital, all I did was add this Fruity Love filter with the Pulsar preset, and then again just use that same EQ to cut the lows to add in room for an 808 later on. Then finally for the bass piano, again it's the same thing, just one EQ to cut the lows, and then on this one I also wanted to shave off a little bit of the highs to make it as deep sounding as possible. So then moving on to the next sound of the melody, I went ahead and added a bunch of ear candy, textures, phrases, and runs, and I grouped them all together and rendered them out through that same Portal preset. So here's what those end up sounding like. So really for this textures and ear candy portion, Portal is doing all of the heavy lifting and making it sound cool. All I did was search through a one-shot kit and grabbed textures, noises, phrases, and there's a couple other words that just kind of mean the same thing, but they're basically all just like little melodic runs that I grouped together and then ran through that same Portal preset to kind of mess them up and make it sound a little bit more interesting. So if we go ahead and look in the browser, all I did was went to this XY one-shot kit, and there's this folder called Noise, and all of these are just perfect sounds to kind of place within the melody and then run through Portal and re-record them and then chop it up from there. So if we just go down the list and listen to these, they're all just kind of little melodic bits and pieces that make a really interesting section for ear candy. So then again, for the effects on those, like I mentioned before, the main texture run just goes through that same double Portal preset that the main key went through, and then the chime sound goes through a different effect chain that's a little bit more subtle. So I started off by just using Fruity Flanger with the mix turned down to about 75%, then a Fruity Love filter on the PC low pass turned down to about 50% on the mix knob. After that, of course, I just added an EQ to cut the lows, again, just to make room for an 808 later on. For the next sound of my melody, I went ahead and grabbed a vocal loop from one of those XY one-shot kits. So I grabbed this one called Glasses, and this is probably my favorite sound that I added to the melody. So here's what it ends up sounding like. So as you can hear, I did end up chopping that up and adding some cool effects that really made a huge difference to the sound of the vocal loop. So for the chops, the main goal was to create that Jersey Club kick pattern with the vocals, which I think turned out very well. So if I go ahead and layer it with the kick that I ended up putting afterwards, they just kind of work together very seamlessly, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. So here's how that sounds. So as you can hear, it just really matches that type of kick pattern really well, and I think it just worked very well for the entire melody. The only other thing to mention for the chops themselves is I added that new crossfading feature that's in FL21 to kind of give them almost a pulsing. So if we go ahead and look at the chops, on the two longer chops, I wanted it to fade in to kind of give that almost kind of a reverse effect. So I did that twice, and then I have the three faster chops kind of pulse out, so they're almost kind of plucky. This just kind of gives the melody kind of a unique bounce that I really liked. So then finally for the effects on those, I started off with Fruity Fast Distort on the fuzz preset, which is automated, then a Fruity Reverb 2 with the wet and decay knob, and that is also automated as well, and then finally a little altar boy with the pitch turned up plus 12. So then if we hop back into the playlist to get a deeper dive at those automation clips, you can see that I have them doing that same pulsing thing that I explained with the crossfade. So it all fades up to get more distorted and more fuzzy with every chop, and it just adds a lot of energy to the sound that I really like. Then for the reverb automation clip, the goal was to kind of fill up that dead space where I left out those two chops. So as you can see here, I have the reverb come in on that last chop, so it can actually like grab onto the sound, if that makes sense, and then it carries that sound throughout the whole gap in a very gentle kind of echoey way that worked very well. So then moving on to the next sound in the melody, I only really added one top line besides those little textures and ear candies, so I went ahead and grabbed this one-shot SIne Bell from a one-shot kit. So here's what that ends up sounding like. So as you saw from that MIDI, it's pretty simple, and it just kind of does almost a kind of clap pattern just to give the melody a little bit more bounce. Really the only thing to mention with this, besides that it's almost kind of a clap pattern, is that I turned the envelope in the sampler onto hold only like you would in 808. So if we go ahead and look at the sampler, you can just go over here and mess with the envelope. So I have everything turned down except the hold. This just makes it so when I play a note, and then when I let go, it's done. So I just kind of think that adds a little bounce where it kind of cuts off and you can kind of directly control when it's playing and where it's not. And then for the effects on those, I didn't add any because I wanted it to sound as dry as possible, and also to preserve that kind of stopping and starting that I did with the hold envelope. So then finally for the last two sounds in the melody, I went ahead into Omnisphere and grabbed this dark cadence bass, but I went ahead and turned off the B section because it added a weird noise and clicking sound to the bass. And then I went ahead and paired that with Boo Bass, which is just a stock FL sound, and it's just an acoustic bass. So here's what those sound like once they're combined together. So then hopping into the MIDI for the Omnisphere bass, like all my bass patterns, they're all really simple and they just follow the root notes. Again, when I use two basses, I always just like to keep in mind that I need to leave empty spaces to fill in with the other bass. So that's exactly what I did here. So once we hop over to the other MIDI, you'll see that I have the acoustic bass playing here, 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 and here. So they just kind of switch back and forth, which I think always sounds really nice. So then finally moving on to the Boo Bass MIDI, like I mentioned before, this just plays when the other one isn't, and I just kind of clicked it in by ear to kind of find the right bounce, as well as playing with the octaves to make it sound a little bit more interesting. So looking closer at it, like I mentioned before, the other bass wasn't playing here, 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 or here, so that one fills it in. And the other thing to pay attention with when you're using the Boo Bass or any other acoustic bass plugin is that leaving spaces like this really matter, and they kind of change the bounce of the bass line completely. So just playing with that, and then also playing with the octaves like I did here, having it jump up one, always sounds really interesting, and it's definitely something you should look into when you're making your acoustic bass patterns. So then starting off with the effects on both of those, for the Omnisphere bass, I just put on Maximus and I turned the gain up to about 9. And then the only other thing I added was an EQ just to kind of boost the mids. And then on the Boo Bass, I don't have anything because I thought it sounded alright as it was. So then finally, I went ahead and rendered it all together and pitched it up one, so here's what it sounds like all combined. So yeah, that's going to be pretty much it for the video. Thank you guys for watching. Yet again, did not make tutorials for like 3 months again. So pretty rusty, but I'm making this one so I can make a video about making this one. It's going to be like the ultimate guide to producer tutorials. So I'll do a whole editing tutorial, whole thumbnail tutorial, what equipment you need. So that should come out, I think the way I'm scheduling it, it should come out in 2 weeks, but I'm pretty excited to do that. That's why I'm recording this one. But yeah, pretty solid. I don't know. That's pretty much it. Thank you guys for watching. Bye.